be before you very long. I want to call your attention to the 5th chapter of Paul's letter to Ephesus. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 14. That's all I want. I want verse 14. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 14. New Living Translation of God's Word. You'll hear it this way. For the light makes everything visible. This is why it is said, awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light. I want to read that again. For the light makes everything visible. This is why it is said, awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light. I want to talk very briefly, not going to hold you long today, from the subject, God's message to a sleeping generation. God's message to a sleeping generation. My brothers and sisters, practically everybody on this yard is familiar with church. Looking out amongst you, recognizing many of your cars, you are either familiar or affiliated with this church or some church. Even if you may not be as familiar with church as I am or some others are, you have at some point in time been around the Lord's house. And I want to suggest today that with all that we're living in and all that we're under, there's a dark cloud over the Lord's house. The other day I was on social media and I ran across a painting that I'm going to do my best to try to find. It's a painting of President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama sitting in a windowsill overlooking the White House, and the White House has a dark black cloud over it with thunder and lightning happening all around. The painting depicts President Obama and his wife looking over where they formerly lived and witnessing the darkness that has now overshadowed 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I want to submit today that that's not the only house that's dark. The church house is dark. You know it's dark when folk don't want to lift their hands in worship. You know it's dark in the Lord's house when folk have failed to realize that God was the one that woke them up this morning. You know it's dark, Ebenezer, when you fail to remember that God is the one that has carried you from decade to decade, and now that a little calamity has come, a little trial has come, you now want to be a faithless generation. My brothers and sisters, Paul writes this letter to the church at Philippi to help them understand that light makes everything visible. Look at the text if you don't believe me. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 14 says, for the light makes everything visible. This is why it says, wake up, sleeper. But I want to go back to the first part of verse 14 because there is where we need to stay today. Look at it again. For the light makes everything. Now you got to understand the wording of the scripture. When Paul used the word everything, he wasn't talking about some things and not other things. He was talking about the giver and the non-giver. He was talking about those who love the Lord and those who do not. He was talking about the choir and the usher board. He was talking about the pastor and the minister. When Paul said, the light makes everything visible. In other words, whatever's dark in your life, the light of God can make it visible. The light of Jesus Christ can shine on whatever you're dealing with and help you see better. And I want to park there momentarily and suggest that that's what's wrong in the black church. We got some blind people in church. That's what's wrong in America. That's why we're still protesting. That's why we're still going to rallies. That's why we're still standing up for what's right, because there are some blind people living in the world. You got to be blind when you can't see that my skin color ought not determine where and how far I go. You got to be blind when you can't see that if you don't give God some of your time, some of your money, and some of your talent, you're not going to be what God created you to be. You got to be blind when you can't understand that the Lord is still able to carry you through. And so, before we go another further, you got to understand, beloved, that sometimes in life, dark clouds will come. I've had my share of dark clouds. Had my share of dark clouds as a pastor, as a son, as a father. Had my share of dark clouds. But every time I called on God, I wish I was in the sanctuary because somebody could shout right there. God shined his light on the darkness and allowed me to see exactly what I needed to see. And here's the problem. Here's the problem as I hasten along, shift these gears. Here's the problem, Charles. The problem is sometimes we're not ready to see the light that God has shined. Or, let me say it this way. Sometimes we're not ready to see what God has shined the light on. You saying that, but I don't understand. You know what kind of child you have. If you ever given birth to a child, you know that there's a difference between your son and your daughter. It's a difference between your firstborn and your thirdborn. It's a difference between the baby of the group and the oldest of the group. And so in your mind, it ought not come as no shock when God shines some light on some stuff as it relates to your children, because you raised them, you birthed them, you ought to know them. So when God shines the light on whatever's right or wrong, it ought just bring confirmation. Now, Jack, I wish I was in Bible study, because that's a good Bible study point. Because what we got to understand is when God shines light on whatever's going on and makes things visible, that is a confirmational moment. Because what happens then is now I can see clearly. I don't believe nobody praying with me. Now I can see, because yesterday I was blind and I could not see. But now that I've asked God to shine light on my situation, and now that he's made it visible, I can see. And that's a good word for somebody today that's going through something. That's a good word for somebody that's catching hell in your home, catching hell on your job, catching hell in the church, catching hell in the community. That's a good word for somebody that's going through a dark moment. If God shines the light on it, he'll make it visible. And when you can see it, work, Palmer, you can work around it. When you can see it, you can navigate through it. When you can see it, you can handle it. When you can see it, you can deal with it. And that's the problem. That's why some of y'all ain't never been able to deal with nothing, because it's never been revealed to you. That's why we still got a lot of ignorant people in church and ignorant people in our community. And that's why it's hard sometimes to get them to understand, because they've never allowed God's light to shine and illuminate that which they've been blinded to. Look what the text says. The text says, for the light makes everything visible. And then Paul gives us another example to confirm verse 14. Dominic Q, y'all better come on, I'm almost done. This is why it says, wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. Now, I need you to understand this here. I need you to understand that you cannot see. I'm going to teach you something you never knew. You cannot see while you're asleep. I'm going to say it again. Somebody missed that. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it clear. You cannot see. Lord just said this to me. You cannot see while you sleep. Now, before the people that are very intellectual try to argue that I can see in my dreams, I ain't talking about dreams. I'm talking about me seeing Stephanie's gray Tahoe while I'm asleep. I'm talking about me seeing Kim's black Viper while I sleep. I'm talking about me seeing Ruth's brown Volvo pitch boy while I'm asleep. I can't see a brown Volvo while I'm asleep because my eyes are closed. And that's the problem. That has been our problem. That continues to be our problem. White people ain't our problem. White supremacy is not our problem. Putting crazy stuff on Facebook and burning down buildings and laying out folk in political arenas is not our problem. Our problem is we've been blind too long. We've been blind to the fact that we serve a God that can resurrect us. We've been blind to the fact that if we go in prayer and be sincere about prayer, God would heal the land. We've been blind to the fact that we sit in church 52 Sundays a year, and every time a storm comes, we want to fuss and cuss, but we never want to pray. I want to make this known. Some pastors have seemingly a problem with rallies, problem with protests. I ain't got a problem. I got a problem with my feet being able to walk them many miles. I ain't got a problem with the protest or the rally. But what I do have a problem with is when we gonna rally and just pray. When we gonna gather at the courthouse and do as King and them did and get on one knee and ask God to heal the land? When are we gonna take this rioting and turn this rioting into a righteous revolution? When are we gonna take what God has given us and use it to Him for Him to get the glory? God ain't getting no glory out of this hell that we're raising, but God will get the glory when we let Him shine the light on that which needs to be made visible. The problem in a lot of our churches, our predecessors, Davion, who are now buried in the cemetery, were blind when they chose certain leaders. They were blind when they hired certain musicians. Yeah, I'm going there today. They were blind when they led the church through the various things that they've led them through, because because I wonder, even in my own pastor, been here 18 years, 44 years old, that messed around and got gray, don't really feel like doing a whole lot no more like I used to. So I bring in younger people to do what I don't feel like doing. And I sometimes question myself. And I say, self, and self says, have I lifted this church enough in prayer? Y'all not praying with me. Sometimes I ask myself, have I taken the vision that I feel God has given me to God in prayer, and have I bathed it in prayer, Lord, in prayer, and have I bathed it in prayer long enough before I present it to you? Sometimes I ask myself, have I asked God to shine the light on some stuff? I'm going to tell you something that I was waiting to say when I got back inside. But I thank God, and I don't mean no harm to nobody.